The panel was packed. The stage lights were glaring. It was a primetime special on political accountability, broadcast live across the country. Rosie O'Donnell, no stranger to controversy, had been invited to stir the pot. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm and composed in a navy blazer, sipping water as producers gave the final countdown. 5, 4, 3, the segment was supposed to be a debate on legislation and civic responsibility, but Rosie, clearly agitated, had another agenda. The moment they were live, she didn't waste time. "I'm just gonna say it," Rosie declared, turning sharply toward Jasmine. "Sometimes I watch you speak, and I wonder if you even understand half the things you say." A collective gasp spread across the studio. Even the host blinked twice. Jasmine didn't flinch. She calmly set down her water and folded her hands. The room was suddenly quieter than the green room before showtime. Cameras zoomed in. Rosie wasn't finished. "I mean, sure, you can throw around legal jargon, but sounding smart doesn't mean being smart. You know what I mean." It was the kind of comment meant to sting. But Jasmine simply nodded, a small, patient smile spreading across her face. "You done?" she asked softly. Rosie leaned back, waiting for a defensive scramble. She didn't get one. Instead, Jasmine straightened up and began to speak, not loud, not fast. But every word, deliberate. Jasmine leaned forward, her fingers calmly interlocked on the table. The audience watched in silence, nobody dared even cough. Rosie sat with a smug grin, as if she had already claimed victory. But Jasmine's voice, cool and razor-sharp, cut through the tension like a scalpel. "You know, Rosie," she began, "I didn't come here to audition for your approval." Rosie blinked. "I'm not a performer," Jasmine continued. "I'm a legislator. And while you were memorizing scripts in a dressing room, I was earning a law degree, working in courtrooms, and defending people the system left behind." The host shifted awkwardly in his seat. Rosie's smile began to falter. "See, intelligence doesn't always wear makeup and shout into a microphone. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it reads. Sometimes it wins arguments without ever raising its voice." A soft murmur moved through the studio. Jasmine wasn't finished. "You can question how I speak, Rosie. But let's not pretend you're qualified to judge what I know." Rosie's lips parted, but no sound came out. "Now," Jasmine said, folding her arms, "are we going to talk about policy, or are you just here to throw shade because Twitter's not enough for you anymore?" The silence was deafening. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Rosie O'Donnell sat frozen. The fire in her expression had dimmed, replaced with a flicker of uncertainty. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, searching for a witty comeback that never arrived. The audience, still stunned, was now inching toward applause. But Jasmine didn't gloat. She simply glanced at the host, waiting, giving everyone a moment to catch up. The host finally cleared his throat. "Well, that escalated quickly." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Jasmine stayed poised. "I didn't escalate anything," she said smoothly. "I just responded." Rosie shifted in her chair, clearly flustered. "Look, I wasn't trying to insult you." "Oh no," Jasmine interrupted, "you absolutely were. But that's fine. Women like me are used to being underestimated." Rosie tilted her head. "Women like you?" Jasmine's tone sharpened, not angry, just precise. "Yes. Black. Southern. Outspoken. Educated. You thought that made me an easy target. But what you didn't count on, is that I came here armed with facts, not feelings." The audience erupted into claps. Rosie lowered her eyes. Jasmine looked around the studio. "Let this be a reminder, don't confuse confidence with arrogance. And don't ever mistake volume for substance." Rosie had nothing left to say. The host smiled awkwardly. "All right, let's take a quick break, because, wow. The cameras faded to commercial, but the energy in the studio didn't cool down. Producers scurried behind the scenes. One whispered to the host, "We've never seen a takedown like that, Twitter's already on fire." Rosie sat still, arms crossed, staring off toward the teleprompter like it had betrayed her. Jasmine calmly checked her notes, completely unbothered. Her composure wasn't just confidence, it was power honed through years of being challenged, underestimated, and talked over. And she had mastered the art of responding with facts and poise, not rage. When the cameras came back on, the host forced a smile. "Well, welcome back. Things got a little passionate before the break." Jasmine chuckled lightly. "Let's call it what it was, a reset." The audience laughed. Even some of the panelists who had stayed silent earlier nodded in agreement. Rosie, visibly trying to recover, jumped in. "Okay, look, I might have come in hot, but I still think it's fair to question how certain members of Congress handle themselves in public." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Absolutely. Question away. But when your question starts with condescension and ends in character attacks, don't expect silence in return." The host turned to the other panelists. "Anyone want to weigh in?" A Republican strategist spoke up, chuckling nervously. "I may not always agree with Representative Crockett's politics, but I wouldn't question her brain." That was surgical. Laughter broke out across the room. Rosie leaned back in her chair, now quieter. Jasmine tapped her pen once on the desk. "I'm all for debate. Just be ready when the other side actually brings a brain to it." The segment wrapped, but the buzz didn't stop. As the credits rolled, social media was already ablaze. Clips of Jasmine's clapback were trending within minutes. Hashtags like #Crockett Clapback and #RosieGotRead were climbing the charts. Backstage, Rosie stayed seated longer than usual. She'd built a career on commanding attention, but tonight, she'd lost control of the room, and the narrative. A producer approached her gently. "Hey, just a heads up. The network's already cutting the clip for highlight reels." Rosie didn't respond. Meanwhile, Jasmine stood calmly near the exit, shaking hands with the makeup crew, smiling at interns, and answering questions from a few younger staffers who were clearly in awe. One of them, a black woman barely out of college, stepped closer. "Ma'am, the way you handled that. It meant more than you know." Jasmine nodded, her tone soft but resolute. "We don't get to pick our battles. But we sure as hell get to decide how we show up." Rosie finally walked past on her way out. Jasmine didn't stop her, but their eyes met for a split second. No smugness. No gloating. Just the quiet weight of respect earned the hard way. Outside the building, reporters were already gathering. One of them called out, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you have a final comment on tonight's exchange with Ms. O'Donnell?" Jasmine paused. "Just this," she said, looking squarely into the lens. "Never confuse loud with right. And never mistake a woman's calm for weakness." Flashbulbs burst. Rosie didn't say another word that night. She didn't have to. Jasmine had already said everything. By morning, the moment was headline news. Crockett silences Rosie O'Donnell in live TV standoff, the most elegant political takedown of the year. Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in grace under fire. Cable networks replayed the clip on loop. Pundits debated it. Analysts dissected every second of Jasmine's tone, her word choice, even her posture. And across social media, users flooded comment sections with reactions ranging from stunned admiration to long overdue recognition. In D.C., staffers in both parties circulated the clip like gossip in the hallways. One aide whispered to a colleague, "She didn't just defend herself, she rewrote the rules on how to do it." That afternoon, Jasmine returned to Capitol Hill, unfazed. Her press secretary handed her a list of interview requests: The View, CNN, NPR, even late-night shows. She skimmed the list and shook her head. Book one local radio station, she said. And reschedule the school visit. The rest can wait. Just one? The aide asked, confused. Jasmine smiled. I didn't say it to go viral. I said it because someone needed to hear it, and they probably don't watch cable. Down the hall, a senior representative from the other party stopped her. He extended a hand with a rare grin. Didn't think I'd be saying this today, but that was one hell of a response last night. Jasmine shook his hand. You should hear me in a hearing. The man chuckled as he walked off. Jasmine turned back to her team. No matter how loud they get, she said, never forget, clarity cuts deeper than volume. And just like that, she was off to her next meeting, unshaken, unbothered, and more respected than ever. Days later, the ripple effects of the exchange were still spreading. Young activists were quoting Jasmine's lines on campus panels. Professors were using the clip in communications and political science classes. Even seasoned commentators acknowledged, it wasn't just a good response, it was a turning point. A prominent op-ed in the Atlantic read, Jasmine Crockett didn't win the moment because she shouted louder, she won because she demonstrated a level of intellectual authority and restraint that's become rare in modern discourse. She showed the country what it means to be sharp, unshaken, and deeply prepared. Meanwhile, Rosie O'Donnell posted a brief statement on her own show, I went too far. I own that. Crockett didn't just put me in my place, she elevated the entire conversation. Respect. To many, that was unexpected. But for Jasmine, it wasn't about the apology. In a quiet interview days later, she addressed it, I don't need every critic to like me. I just want the next young woman, especially one who looks like me, to know that she never has to shrink to be heard. That quote would become a viral poster, etched across t-shirts, notebook covers, and digital art shared thousands of times online. Even months later, when Congress faced a high-stakes committee debate, one of Jasmine's colleagues whispered as she took her seat, can you bring some of that Rosie energy today? Jasmine smirked. I never leave home without it. Behind closed doors in political circles, Jasmine's moment with Rosie O'Donnell became more than just TV drama, it became strategy. Campaign consultants were referencing it. Speakers were studying it. Even elected officials across the aisle had started using the phrase, pull a Crockett. It meant staying cool when provoked. Sharp, not shrill. Calm, not passive. One senior advisor remarked in a think tank meeting, she didn't just clap back, she recalibrated what a political counterstrike should look like in the modern age. At a town hall weeks later, a young girl raised her hand during Q&A. She looked no older than 12. Congresswoman Crockett, she said nervously, how do you stay so calm when people try to make you feel small? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Because I know who I am. And when you know who you are, no one else gets to define your worth, even if they have a mic. The crowd erupted. Parents nodded. Teachers clapped. That one answer spread faster than any campaign ad. Later that night, her team received a text from a well-known civil rights icon. It was only 4 words, she carries the torch. That was it. No fanfare. No follow-up. Just a quiet acknowledgement, from one fighter to another, that the next generation was more than ready. As weeks passed, what had started as a viral moment transformed into a cultural reference point. Cable anchors called it the Crockett line. Late-night comedians joked that even Rosie's mic felt the sting. But it wasn't just a trending moment, it was a shift in tone. Advocacy groups began citing Jasmine's clapback in training sessions, teaching young leaders how to assert themselves without losing their cool. It became a blueprint, how to face public disrespect with precision, not aggression. Meanwhile, a national news magazine ran a cover story titled, The Rise of Jasmine Crockett, Strength in Silence, Power in Precision. Inside, the feature explored her path from civil rights attorney to Congress, and now, a rising symbol of principled leadership. At a fundraiser in Atlanta, an elderly woman approached Jasmine with tears in her eyes. "I watched what you did," she whispered, "and I just wish my mother had lived long enough to see it." Jasmine squeezed her hand gently. "Then I hope someone sees it through you next." Her campaign didn't even need to mention the Rosie moment anymore. The public brought it up on their own, at town halls, college events, even airport terminals. It wasn't about winning a debate. It was about setting a tone that couldn't be undone. By now, Jasmine Crockett's presence in Congress had taken on a new weight. She wasn't just a rising voice, she had become a symbol of unshakable dignity. That one exchange with Rosie O'Donnell had crystallized something many Americans had been craving, a leader who could speak truth without spectacle. At a bipartisan panel on political discourse, one moderator asked bluntly, "Do you think your moment with Rosie changed how people see you?" Jasmine smiled slightly. "I think it reminded people how to see themselves. Not as victims. Not as performers. But as people who can meet chaos with clarity." Applause broke out, not just from the audience, but from fellow lawmakers who once overlooked her. That day, even an old-school senator from across the aisle stood up and said, "I didn't agree with her politics before. But that night, she spoke for a lot more of us than she realized." Back in her district, murals went up. High school students asked to reenact the scene in debate class. A women's nonprofit launched a scholarship in her name, the Crockett Award for Composed Leadership. But Jasmine never bragged. Never gloated. She just kept showing up to committee hearings, reading every bill, grilling witnesses with surgical focus. Her staff joked, "You made history with one sentence, and now you're back in the office checking zoning reports." She grinned. Making a moment is easy. Living up to it, that's the real work. As Congress moved into a heated legislative season, Jasmine's profile only grew, but not because she sought the spotlight. She kept her head down and her questions sharp. Her allies were expanding, and even skeptics began to quietly seek her input behind closed doors. One evening, while preparing for a major committee hearing, her chief of staff rushed into her office. "You've just been invited to speak at the National Leadership Forum. Primetime slot. They want you to close it out." Jasmine didn't look up from the amendment she was reading. "Tell them I'll think about it," she said. "You'll think about it?" her aide replied, incredulous. "Every major figure from across the country is attending. This is legacy stuff." Jasmine paused, finally glancing up. "My legacy isn't a speech. It's a standard." That night, she finally agreed to speak, but she wrote the address herself, refusing ghostwriters or consultants. When she took the stage weeks later, the audience fell silent before she even spoke a word. And then she began, "A few months ago, I was told, on live television, that I sounded smart, but maybe wasn't. I responded. Not with rage. Not with ego. But with something far more dangerous to those who underestimate us, clarity. That moment went viral. But what matters more is what came next." A young girl raised her hand. A retired woman whispered thank you. And a nation remembered what it looks like when strength walks in with heels and homework. "I'm not here for applause. I'm here so you remember what leadership looks like, calm, principled, and ready. Even when they don't see you coming." The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Jasmine stepped off the stage without waiting for the applause to fade. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett's speech was front-page news. Not just because of what she said, but how she carried it. Quiet authority. Clear truth. No theatrics. The headline read, "She didn't just shut down a room, she rewired the conversation." At the Capitol, staffers were already quoting her lines. In classrooms, students were analyzing her strategy. In living rooms across the country, people who had never watched C-SPAN before were now asking, "Who is Jasmine Crockett?" But for Jasmine, the moment wasn't about fame. It was about responsibility. Later that week, she returned to her district, no cameras, no press. Just her and a group of local high school students at a community center. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Do you think people finally listen to you now because of what you said to Rosie O'Donnell?" Jasmine smiled gently. "I think people listen when you stop trying to sound powerful, and just speak from where the power already lives, in your mind, your truth, and your preparation. What I said to Rosie. That was just the spark. What comes after, that's the fire." She looked around the room. "And now it's your turn to carry it." There was no applause. No cameras. Just a long silence, and then, a quiet chorus of nods. The kind that meant something had taken root. Jasmine Crockett walked out of that room the same way she walked into it, still underestimated by some. Still unbothered. And still rewriting the playbook, one sentence at a time.